everyone, I'm Lee Pacchia, and you are watching The Business of Law, the only web TV show focusing on the challenges and opportunities facing a busy legal profession. Great guest today. We have David Perla joining us. David, of course, was the co-founder at LPO Pangea 3. He's the current CEO at Matterhorn Transactions, and he is a longtime participant in the legal startup space. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me,
Been
Lee.
trying to get you on camera for a while.
Glad to be here.
So you've been working in the legal tech space for a long time, as we said, with an eye towards investment. To kick things off here, let's get an idea for how big a market we're talking about.
Sure. So I'll give you two numbers, two ways of looking at the market. The first I'll give you is total investment. The second number I'm going to give you is total number of startups playing in the space. I like that number better, so we'll finish there. Mm-hmm. Total number invested by our calculations, I work with a couple of guys on this, in 2013 we think was just over $450 million, so can round it up and call it $500 million. We think the market this year is on track to clear that $500 million number, and by our calculations we've seen about $100 million invested year to date. So through mid-March, about $100 million invested in the legal, what I'll call the legal startup ecosystem. Other number to look at, the number of startups playing in the space. You can look at legal in a number of different ways. By our calculation, you've got somewhere around 200 startups operating in the legal environment. Some are tech-driven, some are not tech-driven, some are large, some are just a couple of people, but call it about 200 companies.
So let's get a feel for the lay of the land here. Who are the major investors in this space other than yourself?
Sure. So again, you've got a bit of a fragmented market. You've got companies that are seed stage, and there you've got a number of different players. I'll talk about those. And then you do have later stage companies in which venture capital plays a role. And then you have your kind of exit strategies, which usually involve one of the major players in the space. At the seed level, you have a variety of activity happening. You don't have a single dominant seed player. Even legal tech tends to be viewed as a niche market. You do have some people that have taken to the space. So a guy like Peter Thiel has some legal investments. He has lots of investments. He certainly has not shied away from the legal space. You've got a couple of seed funds, guys like myself and my partner Sanjay Kamlani at 1991 Ventures. We play a lot in the legal space. Ulu Ventures out west is Miriam Rivera, the former second lawyer at Google. She does a lot of investing in seed space in legal. And then you've got a variety of people, I don't want to say predominantly on the coasts, but a lot of it happening on the coasts. At the next stage, you have venture capital funds. Some of them will do seed. Some of them will stick to the more traditional A round and later. And there you've got all sorts of people playing, and that's where it gets really interesting, as people are always saying, well, venture capitalists don't like the legal space. In fact, they do. So my old company, Pangea 3, was funded by Sequoia Capital, well-known fund. Canaan plays in this space. Foundry Group is actually quite active in this space. So they've got a couple of investments in what I think of as pure legal startups. A number of the other West Coast venture capital funds are invested in legal startups. RRE here in New York plays in the legal space, so they're always happy to look at it. So I think you've got a microcosm of traditional venture capital will look at legal, and they understand it in a way that they most certainly did not understand it 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was really planning and ultimately launching Pangea 3.
So we laid out the players here. I got to ask, are they making money at this point?
Some certainly are. Sequoia certainly did when we sold Pangea 3. I think
that was a $100 million transaction?
Yeah, just sub $100 million in the high 90s. You've got Canaan has a very successful investment in United Lex alongside of Helion, and Sequoia has a small piece. Widely known, United Lex is on the market. That will be a very successful exit. One way or the other, for those investors, that'll be a successful exit. They've been in that a long time. Foundry, some of their investments are doing well, others less so. The others are still early days, so it's not clear. And you have had some exits, particularly out west, where there have been successful exits.
So let's get predictive here. Based on the number of startups that you outlined earlier, what percentage of legal tech startups will be around in 3 years? and how does that percentage compare to the broader startup community?
Sure. When I dodge a question, I like to tell you I'm going to dodge it. So I'm going to dodge your question.
We can't let you dodge this.
Yeah.
We need to
So
know.
I think 3 years may be the wrong number. That's
Okay.
why I'm going to dodge it. It may be that 3 years is just too short. You can even the largest cash burning companies can often limp along for 3 years, and a lot of these startups are not cash burning, or they're burning, but they can last a year or two pretty easily, and they can probably get another round. So I like to think of it in kind of 5-year terms. I can't answer definitively the percentage. I think it's probably the same percentage that you see in the rest of the startup market, which is a significant majority will fail. That is the trend, and when they do, the prognosticators in the legal market will say it's evidence that the legal market is stuck in the dark ages, that it's not ripe for disruption, that there's no innovation. A vast majority of startups in every other industry actually fail. So I think we're going to see the same thing. There are good reasons for that, not the least of which is this country and the ecosystem we all play in capital is very, very competitive. And it's not easy to build a business. It's not easy to build a small business, let alone one which has outside money and therefore has to grow very quickly. Whether that number is 60%, 70%, 80%, I can't tell you. I can tell you in the LPO space, at the peak of the number of players, reports showed over 100 named legal process outsourcing companies in sort of the 2007 timeframe. Today, I doubt people would even recognize more than 10 names as playing in the space, and more likely 5 or 6 names. So a 90% failure rate is not uncommon in any nascent industry and in the startup world. So I think we're going to see a majority failure rate.
It's interesting to talk about this concept because it ties into the notion that lawyers are slow to adopt technology and change the way they do business. We're also talking about the startup world. We saw Airbnb yesterday come out with news that they're looking for a valuation of something like $10 billion, an astronomical sum. Many people are talking about the notion that there might be a bubble in the startup space. Where do you come down on a question like that, and does it apply to the legal tech startup space?
Sure. Yeah, there's probably something of a bubble in the startup space, generally speaking, but a considerably more measured bubble than we saw in 1999 and 2000. Bearing in mind, I spent 5.5 years at Monster.com, so I was sort of familiar with the original, what I'll call the .com bubble, as opposed to now it's a tech or internet bubble. So I think you are seeing one, but I don't think it's nearly as overheated, and I think a lot of it is grounded in expectations of businesses that could actually grow. So Airbnb is an interesting one. Uber is one that also you hear a lot of talk about. But
astronomical numbers.
Astronomical numbers, but astronomical adoption. You go all over the world. I was in Israel last week. People know Uber. And if they're not using Uber, they have their own version of it in almost every developed country where people are carrying mobile today. So clearly people want this. Clearly they're filling a void. The drivers, if you talk to them, love it. So I think you do have real businesses today. They may be overvalued, but they're real, and there's a rush to find them. Yeah. Within legal, I don't think you have nearly the bubble. You do have some excessive valuations for the companies that are perceived as hot or perceived as very highly tech-enabled or capable of leveraging technology. That's a function of, I think, two things. Number one, where technology plays a role, people find those more scalable. So they like those better, and they're willing to give them a much higher valuation than, let's say, a Pangea 3. We were considered tech-enabled, but not a technology business. Number two, we are in a very low-yield capital environment, and as a result, a lot of cash has been sitting on the sidelines for many, many years. So I was on the phone with a partner from one of the 5 highest grossing ML 100 firms, and talking about potentially doing a legal seed fund. And he suggested, not with any bragging, that it wouldn't be that difficult to walk the halls and easily get a $100,000 check from 20 or 30 of his partners, or probably with a little bit more difficulty, but also possible, 10 to 20 would write a check for $250,000 because they're making so much money and they're so liquid at the top of these law firms that there's nowhere to get yield. So I think part of this is driven by people who are willing to put some proportion of their work into startups. A last dynamic, which I think is fascinating, and this is very, very different than when I started Pangea 10 years ago. Many more people today like the idea of funding startups, so they're less concerned about the valuation. To them, if a business is valued at 4 or 6 or 8 or 10 is not relevant. They want the opportunity to participate. They like the idea that this is part of the great American story, that they are involved with entrepreneurs, they get to tell their friends about it, and they're hoping for an exit. So whether that's an IPO or that's a sale of their business, they're not looking at it in the clinical P&L terms that a venture capital fund would look at.
Does that concern you? I mean, we have, by my count, something like 740 conferences a year about legal tech startups in this country. I mean, there's a cultural phenomenon at play here. Does that make you nervous, or do you see that as additional opportunity?
I think it doesn't make me nervous for any number of reasons. One, the cream generally rises to the top. So the better funders, the better investors, the better partners usually get paired with the better entrepreneurs. And over time, what entrepreneurs will see, just as we saw when we went out for money, that smart money usually is worth it, even if it's at less of a premium or even at a discount to what you might perceive your market value. And oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's just a function of who do I take money from. There's also the dollar volumes in that, and crowdfunding are really not significant relative to the amount of capital moving. So the number I just gave you, if you were to look at the investment numbers in legal startups, a very small minority come from crowdfunding or come from these sources. But it is accounting for the culture of kind of startup investment that you're starting to see in this country.
Fundamental to all of this working, lawyers need to change the way they do business. I mean, that's what's at essence here. They've been so reluctant to do so for so long. Do you see that critical change on the horizon? And if so, when and how is that going to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I spoke about this. If you look at human evolution, we have what we call the Cambrian period, which is the period in which we had a rapid increase in the number of families, and the biological families that exist today were almost all evidenced in that Cambrian period, a very short phase. I don't think we're there. I think we're in what I've called publicly a pre-Cambrian period. I think we're still a decade off of significant acceleration in the rate of change. That being said, I think we are still much faster than we were 10 years ago. So if you looked at the market 10 years ago when I first started my old company, you really had two types of players in the space. You had legal outsourcing companies, and some people, rightly or wrongly, would argue that was labor arbitrage. It was an extension of outsourcing with a tech enablement but not a tech driver. And you had e-discovery, which was a tech play, but that was driven by the volume of data and a change in the rules of evidence. So neither was driven by a change in the way lawyers practice. I think today the diversity of startups out there is much broader. Some of those will fail. Some of them are not proven. Some of them are just throwing things at the wall. But there are some where there's some very interesting product. There's some very interesting business models that may be ahead of their time, but eventually they're going to work. They're going to be adopted. They're going to solve a problem. So I do hear, sometimes I hear lawyers, particularly at big law, say, "Well, there's a solution in search of a problem." There's no problem. That solution searching for a problem until the client tells you there's a problem. Maybe that's not next year. Maybe that's in 3 years. Maybe that's in 5 years. When we did our prior business, we really slogged at it from 2004 till middle of 2008, and nothing prods people to action and change like a recession. And our business really scaled. We had our hockey stick coming out of the recession. So our rapid growth months started in about March of 2009, exactly 5 years ago, as we people came out from under their desks. So I think you will see there'll be some impetus for change, and there's a lot of technology and product out there ready to solve the problem.
Very interesting stuff. David, thank you so much for stopping by.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's what we have for this week. If you'd like to learn more about what we're working on, be sure to follow us on Twitter and go check out our YouTube channel. It's pretty damn good. I'm Lee Pacchia. See you next week.